You changed everything without consulting me." Quinn Walker snapped, her voice brimming with frustration as she threw a folder full of papers onto the meeting room table. Her face was flushed, and her blue eyes sparkled with anger. "Do you have any idea how disrespectful that is?" Parker James, casually leaning against the table with her arms crossed, raised an eyebrow. "Disrespectful would be letting your boring, impactless presentation reach the client." "I did you a favor, Walker." "A favor?" Quinn scoffed, incredulous. "You threw out all my research, replaced my charts, and had the audacity to use my name on the presentation as if I agreed to it." "Because I knew, deep down, you would agree," Parker replied, her calm tone contrasting with Quinn's intensity. "You just don't want to admit that I was right." The air in the room seemed electrified, charged with growing tension. Quinn leaned forward, placing her hands on the table. "Listen here, James, what you did was sabotage. If this project fails, it's on you, and I'll make sure everyone knows it." "You really love to dramatize," Parker retorted, leaning in as well, moving closer to Quinn. "The project won't fail because, thanks to me, it's actually good now." The sound of firm footsteps interrupted the argument. Their boss, a middle-aged man with a perpetually tired expression, opened the door, stopping at the entrance. "What's going on here?" Both women quickly stepped back, trying to compose themselves. "Quinn and I were adjusting some details," Parker said, with a smile that barely concealed her provocation. "Right," the boss replied, looking between them. "I hope these adjustments don't delay the delivery. The client wants this by Friday. You've got 2 days. Work together or don't even think about coming to me with excuses." He left without waiting for a response, leaving the two alone again. Quinn exhaled heavily, sitting down and running a hand over her face. "Great," she muttered. 2 days with you." "I'm just as thrilled as you are," Parker replied, returning to her spot. Quinn Walker was the kind of person who made lists for everything. At only 25, she was already known for her relentless efficiency and obsessive attention to detail. For Quinn, every detail mattered, and nothing short of excellence was acceptable. Across the room, Parker James was the complete opposite. At the same age as Quinn, Parker had a bolder, more laid-back approach. She had an innate ability to charm people and thrived under pressure, something that constantly put her at odds with people like Quinn. The two women were at opposite ends of the professional spectrum, but shared one thing in common: a fierce determination to succeed. That week, success meant making the project for one of the company's biggest clients a triumph. Hours passed in tense silence as they worked on the project, each trying to avoid the other. When they finally reached a point where they had to collaborate, friction was inevitable. "This slide needs to be redesigned," Quinn said, pointing to the laptop screen. "The layout is confusing." "Confusing?" Parker asked, incredulous. "This is modern design. The client will love it." "Modernity is no excuse for disorganization," Quinn countered, crossing her arms. "Be creative, but keep it clear. You really know how to turn everything into a lecture, don't you?" Parker replied, smirking. "Maybe I should write this down in my notebook." "Maybe you should," Quinn shot back with a forced smile. "At least then you'd learn something." Parker laughed, though her tone was slightly provocative. "You enjoy hating me, don't you?" "If hating you helped me tolerate you, then yes," Quinn quipped. Despite the sharp words, there was something in the air, a strange kind of chemistry neither of them was ready to admit. As the night wore on, exhaustion began to weigh on them, making the jabs less frequent. For a moment, they both focused solely on the work, and the silence became more comfortable. "I need coffee," Quinn muttered, standing up and stretching. "Want some?" Parker looked up, surprised by the offer. "You're being nice?" "Don't get used to it," Quinn replied, leaving the room. "I just don't want to hear you complaining about being tired later." Parker chuckled softly as Quinn walked out. Despite the constant rivalry, there was something intriguing about Quinn. Parker couldn't quite pinpoint what, but she was starting to see more in the woman than just annoying perfectionism and a need for control. When Quinn returned with 2 cups of coffee, she placed one in front of Parker without a word. Parker raised the cup in a gesture of thanks. "Temporary truce?" Parker asked, smirking. Temporary truce, Quinn replied, returning to her seat. But even as she focused on the documents, a small smile crept onto her face. By around 9 at night, the office was practically empty. Quinn and Parker were the only ones left on the floor, the oppressive silence surrounding the room. Quinn was deeply focused on reviewing the final data when she noticed Parker watching her. "What?" Quinn asked, looking up. Parker shrugged. "You're different when you're focused." "Less annoying. Thanks." "I think," Quinn replied, frowning. "And you're less insufferable when you're quiet." Parker laughed, leaning forward. "You realize that if we want to survive this, we'll have to stop pretending we hate everything about each other, right?" "I don't pretend anything," Quinn replied, crossing her arms. "What you see is exactly what I feel." Parker shook her head, smirking. "Sure, Walker. Sure." The silence returned, but something in the air felt different. It was as if their banter had lost its edge, making room for something lighter. No matter how much they refused to admit it, both were starting to realize there was something intriguing about their rivalry. A strange kind of chemistry that neither of them knew how to handle. Hours later, already exhausted, Quinn stretched and let out a long sigh. "I need a break." "Finally, we agree on something," Parker replied, getting up from her chair. "Let's grab something from the cafe downstairs. They should still be open." Quinn hesitated, but eventually nodded. "Okay, but don't think this is an invitation for casual conversation." "Relax, Walker," Parker said as they walked down the hallway. "I promise not to tease you too much." The cafe was nearly empty, save for a bored barista behind the counter. The two ordered coffee and some snacks, sitting at a table near the window. "Okay, I'll admit," Parker said, looking at Quinn. "Despite all the drama, working with you isn't as bad as I thought." "Is that the closest you can get to a compliment?" Quinn asked, raising an eyebrow. "Maybe," Parker replied with a smirk. "But it's true. You're good at what you do, even if you have an insufferable way of making that obvious." "Thanks," Quinn said dryly. But there was a slight smile on her lips, something she tried to hide by taking a sip of her coffee. Parker noticed, but decided not to comment. Instead, she leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand. "You know, you're different from what I expected too." "What do you mean?" Quinn asked, curious. "I always thought you were just a control-obsessed perfectionist," Parker explained. "But there's something about you. A passion for what you do that's, I'll admit, kind of admirable." Quinn blinked, surprised. "Wow, was that an actual compliment?" "Don't get used to it," Parker replied, winking at her. Finally, the day of the presentation arrived. The room was filled with executives and client representatives, all eagerly awaiting what Quinn and Parker had prepared. The two stood side by side at the front of the room, each with their well-rehearsed parts. Quinn started, presenting the data with clarity and confidence. Then, Parker took over, bringing a dynamism that captivated the audience. It was evident that, despite their differences, they had found a way to work in perfect harmony. When the presentation ended, the room erupted in applause. Their boss, visibly impressed, made a point to congratulate them personally. "You two were incredible," he said, smiling. "If I'd known your rivalry would be this productive, I would have paired you up sooner." Quinn and Parker exchanged a glance but said nothing. When they were finally alone in the room, Quinn sighed in relief. "We did it," she said, smiling slightly. "Yeah, we did," Parker replied, leaning against the table. "And I'll admit, it was because of you too." Quinn looked at her, surprised. "What?" "You heard me," Parker said with a sly smile. "You did a good job, Walker." Quinn chuckled softly. "Thanks. You did too." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, but was filled with a tension that both were still trying to understand. As they packed up their papers to leave, Parker broke the silence. "You know, as much as you annoy me, I think I'll miss arguing with you." Quinn paused, looking up. She held a stack of folders against her chest, her expression shifting between surprise and uncertainty. "Miss it? Was that a compliment?" "Maybe," Parker replied, wearing her signature smirk, full of charm and teasing. "Or maybe I'm just thinking out loud." Quinn shook her head, rolling her eyes. "You really can't let an opportunity to confuse me go, can you? Confusing you is the most fun part, Parker shot back, her tone light, but her gaze locked onto Quinn's. Quinn remained silent, feeling the air in the room shift. The tension between them, which had always felt combative, now felt different. Something new. Something Quinn didn't know how to handle. Before she could say anything, Parker took a step forward, closing the distance between them. "Parker," Quinn began, but her voice was softer than she intended. "Sure," Parker murmured, her smile fading. For a moment, the silence grew heavier. Then, without a second thought, Parker leaned in and kissed her. It was a quick, impulsive gesture. Parker lightly held Quinn's arm, and their lips met in a movement as gentle as it was unexpected. For a second, time seemed to stand still. Quinn froze. Her eyes widened as the kiss happened. Then, abruptly, she stepped back, putting distance between herself and Parker. "Quinn, wait," Parker started, but Quinn raised a hand as if asking for space. "Why did you do that?" Quinn asked, her voice shaky. She clutched the papers in her hands more tightly now, as if they were a shield. Parker hesitated, clearly searching for the right words. "I don't know. I just felt like I should." "That doesn't make sense," Quinn said, her voice rising slightly. She took another step back as if needing even more space. "We were arguing 2 seconds ago, and now you kiss me?" "Quinn," Parker started, but she stopped, running a hand through her hair, clearly frustrated with herself. "I didn't plan this, okay? It just happened." Quinn shook her head, her eyes avoiding Parker's. "This was a mistake." "A mistake?" Parker repeated, her expression hardening slightly. "Seriously?" "Yes," Quinn said quickly, her voice firm. "I don't know what you're thinking, but this can't happen. Not between us." "Why not?" Parker asked, crossing her arms. "Because it's easier to pretend there's nothing between us?" "There is nothing," Quinn replied, the words sounding more defensive than she intended. "We're coworkers. That's all." Parker stepped back, raising her hands in a gesture of surrender. "Okay, if that's how you want to see it." "That's how it is," Quinn insisted, but her voice wavered. The silence between them returned, heavier than ever. Feeling the need to escape, Quinn quickly gathered her papers and headed toward the door. "I need to go." "Sure," Parker replied, crossing her arms and watching as Quinn hurried out. When the door closed, Parker sighed, leaning against the table. "Great," she muttered to herself, her frustration evident. "You really know how to complicate everything, Parker." The following days were a blur of tense silence. Quinn avoided Parker at all costs, and when the two had to interact, the conversations were short and strictly professional. The project had already been delivered, and the client's feedback was excellent, but that seemed insignificant compared to the emotional confusion lingering between them. Parker, on the other hand, wasn't one to ignore problems. She tried to approach Quinn whenever possible, but the wall between them felt impenetrable. That Friday, as Quinn was packing her things to leave, Parker walked into the room and shut the door behind her. "Can we talk?" "I think we've already said everything that needed to be said," Quinn replied without looking at her. "I don't think so," Parker said, stepping closer to the meeting table. "You're avoiding me. And I understand why. What happened the other night, it was confusing. For me too." Quinn finally looked up, frustration evident on her face. "Then why did you do it? If it was confusing for you, why complicate everything?" "Because I felt something," Parker said bluntly. "And as confusing as it is, I can't pretend it doesn't exist." "Parker," Quinn started, but Parker interrupted her. "Quinn, you can hate me, you can find me impossible, but you can't deny there's something between us," Parker said, her voice softer now. "I see it every time we argue, every time you roll your eyes at my jokes. There's something here, and pretending it doesn't exist won't make it go away." Quinn sighed, dropping her bag onto the table. "You think everything is so simple, don't you? But us, we're complicated. We're opposites. We work together. This would never work." "Maybe," Parker said, shrugging. "But maybe what makes us different is exactly what makes us work. You challenge me. And honestly, I think I need that." Quinn looked at her, surprised by the sincerity in Parker's words. For a moment, silence filled the room. Then, finally, Quinn broke it. I don't know what to do with this, Quinn admitted, her voice laden with uncertainty. I don't know how to handle this. You don't have to know right now, Parker said, stepping closer slowly. But maybe we can figure it out together. The following weeks were a learning experience for both. The arguments subsided, replaced by teasing that carried a lighter, almost affectionate tone. Though they didn't label anything, their dynamic began to shift. On a particularly cold evening, Parker invited Quinn out to celebrate the project's success. Reluctant at first, Quinn eventually agreed, curious to see what Parker had planned. Seated in a cozy little bar, the two talked like never before. Quinn discovered that Parker had a more vulnerable side than she'd ever imagined, and Parker realized that Quinn was funnier and more relaxed when she let her guard down. When the night came to an end, Parker walked Quinn to her car. You know I'm still going to keep annoying you at work, right? Parker said, smiling. I wouldn't expect anything less, Quinn replied, laughing. Parker hesitated for a moment before speaking. Quinn, about what happened in the meeting room. I want to apologize if I pressured you. That wasn't my intention. You don't need to apologize, Quinn said, looking at Parker. I just needed time to figure out how I feel. And now, Parker asked, her voice low, almost a whisper. Quinn took a step forward, her expression more open than Parker had ever seen. Now I think I'm ready. Without waiting, it was Quinn who took the initiative this time, leaning in to kiss Parker gently. There was no hesitation in the gesture, only certainty. When they pulled apart, Parker was smiling. That was better than I expected. You're impossible, Quinn replied, laughing. And you love it, Parker retorted, taking Quinn's hand. 6 months later, life at the office continued to be busy, but the relationship between Quinn and Parker had evolved in unexpected ways. Though they still bickered over insignificant details, everyone could see there was something different between them. The arguments had transformed into a kind of dance, a playful exchange filled with teasing and affection. That night, as they wrapped up yet another project, Parker looked at Quinn, who was focused on perfecting the final details. You know, if someone had told me 6 months ago that you'd be the best part of my day, I would have laughed. And now? Quinn asked without taking her eyes off the screen. Now I know it's true, Parker said, smiling. Quinn glanced at her, her face softening into a smile. You're getting sentimental, James. Only with you, Walker, Parker replied. And in that moment, they both knew that, despite all their differences, they had found something special. Something that made the teasing, the challenges, and the arguments worth it. If you enjoyed the story, give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. Comment below what type of story you'd like to see in the next video.